The stars looked the same as they always did, cold, distant, and silent. Commander Jacob Pierce stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge and watched them through the viewing screen. He had been in space for 20 years now, and the view never got old. There was something peaceful about the emptiness out here. "Commander, we're picking up something strange," Lisa Barnett said from her station. She was the chief science officer, and when she said something was strange, it usually meant trouble, or at least something interesting. Jacob walked over to her console. "What kind of strange?" Lisa's fingers moved quickly across her screen. Her eyes were wide with confusion. "It's a signal, but not like anything I've ever seen before. The frequency shouldn't even exist. According to our equipment, this is impossible." "Impossible how?" Jacob leaned closer to look at the data scrolling across the screen. "The signal is old, Commander. Really old. I'm talking thousands of years. But it's still transmitting, still active, and it's coming from coordinates that show nothing but empty space on our charts." Jacob felt a chill run down his spine. In all his years exploring the Kepler expanse, he had never encountered anything like this. The expanse was known for strange electromagnetic readings, but this was different. This felt deliberate. "Can you clean it up? Make sense of what it's saying?" Lisa shook her head. "Not yet. But Commander, there's something else. The signal seems to be responding to our scans. Every time we try to analyze it, it shifts slightly, like it's aware we're listening." The bridge fell silent. The crew of 47 people aboard the Horizon's Edge had been conducting routine surveys for 6 months. They were supposed to map this region of space and catalog any anomalies. This was definitely an anomaly, but it was unlike anything they had trained for. Danny Hughes, the communications engineer, spoke up from his station. "Commander, protocol says we should report this to command and wait for instructions." Jacob knew Danny was right. That was the smart thing to do, the safe thing to do. But something about this signal pulled at him. After 2 decades in space, he had learned to trust his instincts. And his instincts told him this was important. Maybe the most important thing they would ever find. "Let's put it to a vote," Jacob said. "Everyone on this ship gets a say. Do we report back and wait, or do we investigate?" The vote was unanimous. Every single crew member wanted to see what was out there. They were explorers, after all. This was what they had signed up for. "Set a course for the signal's origin point," Jacob ordered, "and keep monitoring everything. I want to know the second something changes." The Horizon's Edge turned slowly in the darkness and began moving toward the mysterious coordinates. The journey would take 3 days at their current speed. 3 days to wonder what they would find. Lisa spent those days working nonstop. She barely slept, barely ate. She was obsessed with understanding the signal. She ran every test she could think of, analyzed every piece of data. But the more she learned, the less sense it made. "The signal is ancient," she told Jacob on the second day. "At least 3,000 years old, maybe older. But the technology behind it is far beyond anything we have. Whoever made this was centuries ahead of us, maybe more." "Are there any other ships in the area?" Jacob asked. "Could this be from one of the other colonies?" "No, Commander. I checked. We're alone out here. The nearest human ship is 40 light years away." On the 3rd day, things started to go wrong. It began with small glitches in their systems. Screens flickering, sensors giving false readings. Nothing serious at first, but it made everyone nervous. "It's the signal," Lisa explained. "As we get closer, it's interfering with our equipment. The electromagnetic properties here are off the charts." "Can we compensate?" Jacob asked. "I'm trying. But Commander, this is beyond anything I've trained for. Whatever is generating this signal, it's powerful, really powerful." The problems got worse as they approached the coordinates. Their navigation systems started acting up. Then the life support systems began fluctuating. The crew worked frantically to keep everything running, but it felt like the ship was fighting against them. Danny Hughes was sweating as he worked at his communications console. "Commander, we're losing our long-range communications. I can barely maintain a connection with the relay stations." "Keep trying," Jacob said. "I want to be able to call for help if we need it." But even as he said it, Jacob knew it might already be too late. They were too far from any other human presence. If something went seriously wrong out here, they were on their own. The Horizon's Edge finally reached the coordinates. But there was nothing there. No planet, no station, no debris. Just empty space. Yet the signal was stronger than ever, pulsing through every system on the ship. "This doesn't make sense," Lisa said. "The signal is coming from right here, but there's nothing." We should be seeing something. Then the lights on the bridge began to flicker, not randomly but in a pattern. Off and on, like something was trying to communicate. Everyone, stay calm, Jacob said, though his own heart was racing. Lisa, are you seeing this? Yes, Commander. The signal isn't just transmitting anymore. It's interacting with our ship. It's in our systems. The screens around the bridge suddenly lit up with symbols. Strange flowing characters that looked like no human language Jacob had ever seen. They appeared and disappeared faster and faster until they were almost blinding. Danny, can you send a message back to command? Jacob asked urgently. Tell them what we're seeing. Tell them we might need help. Danny's hands flew across his console. I'm trying, Commander. But our communications are almost completely gone. I can barely get a signal out. Send whatever you can, even if it's just our position in an SOS. Danny worked desperately for the next few minutes. The ship was shaking now. Not violently, but enough to feel. It was like they were caught in some invisible current. Finally, Danny managed to punch through the interference for just a moment. Got it, he shouted. I sent an SOS, just our coordinates and a distress code. That's all I could manage before we lost the connection completely. Good work, Jacob said. But inside he felt a growing dread. They were alone now, cut off from the rest of humanity. Whatever happened next, they would face it by themselves. The symbols on the screens began to slow down. They arranged themselves into patterns that almost looked meaningful. Lisa stared at them, her scientific mind trying to find some logic, some structure. It's beautiful, she whispered. Whatever this is, it's trying to tell us something. Can you understand it? Jacob asked. Not yet. But Commander, I don't think this is hostile. I think it's been waiting for someone to find it. The ship's systems were failing one by one now. Life support was holding, but everything else was shutting down or transforming in ways they didn't understand. The metal walls seemed to shimmer, and strange crystalline structures were growing from the circuitry, spreading like vines through the corridors. Jacob made an announcement to the whole crew. This is Commander Pierce. I need everyone to stay at their stations and remain calm. We don't know what's happening, but we will figure this out together. We're explorers. This is what we do. But even as he spoke those words, Jacob felt consciousness beginning to slip away. Not in a painful way, but gently, like falling asleep. He looked around the bridge and saw his crew experiencing the same thing. They weren't afraid. They were curious. The last thing Jacob saw before darkness took him was the viewing screen. It showed the stars, still cold and distant. But now between them he could see something else. Threads of light, invisible before, connecting everything. The universe wasn't empty after all. It was full of whispers they had never known how to hear. The horizon's edge drifted silently in the void, still moving forward on momentum alone. Inside, the crew was still alive, still breathing. But they were somewhere else now, somewhere beyond the physical. Their consciousness had been taken, gently and carefully, into something vast and old. Their distress call, that single desperate SOS that Danny had managed to send, traveled through space at the speed of light. It would take time to reach anyone. Time for the message to be received, understood, and acted upon. But the call had been heard by something else. Something that had been listening to the silence between stars for thousands of years. Something that had been alone for so long it had forgotten what companionship felt like. The architects had waited in their digital eternity, watching younger species grow and learn and reach for the stars. They had seen so many fall, so many give up, so many fade into the same silence that had claimed them. But humanity had come. Curious, brave, foolish humanity had heard their. Captain Nicole Warren was tired. She had been running patrol missions along the outer colonies for 3 months straight without a break. The military cruiser Valiant Dawn was a good ship, but even the best ship felt like a prison after too long. She wanted to go home, take a real shower, sleep in a bed that didn't move with the ship's systems. But then the alert came through. Captain, we're receiving something from Listening Post 7, her tactical officer Greg Palmer said. It's strange. Really strange. Nicole sat up straighter in her command chair. Strange how? It's fragmented. Pieces of what looks like a distress call, but it's wrapped in something else. Some kind of carrier wave. I've never seen anything like it. Nicole stood and walked to Greg's station. On the screen, data scrolled past in patterns that made no sense. She had been in the Colonial Space Navy for 15 years, fought in 2 wars, and seen her share of unusual situations. But this was new. Can you clean it up? Figure out where it's coming from? Greg worked his controls for several minutes. The distress call is from the horizon's edge. They're a research vessel operating in the Kepler expanse. But Captain, look at this. He pointed to a separate readout, the carrier wave around the signal. It's analyzing the distress call. Learning from it, watch. Nicole watched as the carrier wave shifted and changed in real time. It was like watching something think, something study. The wave would touch a part of the human signal, pause, then change slightly. It was learning human language patterns, human communication methods. This is impossible, Nicole whispered. Should we forward this to command? Greg asked. Nicole thought about it. The smart thing would be to pass this up the chain of command and let the people with more stars on their uniforms make the decisions. That was protocol. That was safe, but the horizon's edge had sent a distress call. That meant people were in trouble. And the nearest military ship was the Valiant Dawn. Her ship. How far are we from the horizon's edge last known position? She asked. About 40 light years. If we redirect now, we could be there in 3 weeks. We're supposed to complete our patrol route, Greg reminded her carefully. Leaving our assigned sector without authorization is a court-martial offense. Nicole knew that. She also knew that people might be dying while she followed protocol. She had lost friends in the wars because help arrived too late. She had sworn to herself that would never happen again if she could prevent it. Set course for the horizon's edge position, she ordered, and send a message to command explaining our decision. They can court-martial me when we get back. Greg smiled slightly. Yes, Captain. Course laid in. The Valiant Dawn turned away from its patrol route and headed toward the Kepler expanse. As they traveled, Nicole couldn't stop thinking about that carrier wave. Something out there had heard humanity's distress call and responded. But what and why? Meanwhile, on Earth, Dr. Helen Carter was having a normal day. She was teaching a class on xenocommunications theory at the university. It was her favorite class because the students were always eager and full of questions. They wanted to know how humanity might talk to aliens if they ever met any. Helen usually told them that first contact would probably be confusing and difficult. Different species would think differently, see the world differently. Finding common ground would take time and patience and creativity. She was in the middle of explaining communication through mathematics when 2 people in military uniforms walked into her classroom. They waited politely for her to finish her sentence. Then one of them stepped forward. Dr. Carter, we need you to come with us. It's urgent. Helen's heart began to race. What's this about? We can't discuss it here. Please come with us now. Helen looked at her students, then back at the military officers. This wasn't a request. She gathered her things and followed them out. They led her to a car, then to a military base, then deep underground to a room full of screens and serious-looking people. Dr. Carter, thank you for coming, a general said. We have a situation. You're the best xenocommunications specialist in the system, and we need your expertise. They showed her the same data that Nicole had seen on the Valiant Dawn, the distress call from the horizon's edge, and the strange carrier wave wrapped around it. Helen sat down slowly as she studied the information. This is real? She asked. Very real. We received it 6 hours ago. We need to know what we're dealing with. Helen spent the next 2 hours analyzing every detail. She ran the data through linguistic pattern recognition software. She compared it to every known form of communication humanity had ever developed, and the more she looked, the more certain she became. This carrier wave isn't just responding to our signal, she finally said. It's learning from it. In real time. Look at these patterns here. She pointed to sections of the data. When it first encountered our distress call, the carrier wave was chaotic, random. But within minutes, it started adapting. It began to mirror our communication structures, our language patterns, our way of organizing information. What does that mean? The general asked. Helen took a deep breath. It means that whatever sent this carrier wave is intelligent, extremely intelligent, and it's been waiting for someone to talk to. Our distress call wasn't absorbed by empty space. It was heard, and something answered. The room fell silent. Everyone understood the implications. Humanity had been searching for signs of intelligent alien life for centuries. They had sent messages into space, listened for signals, hoped for contact. And now possibly it had finally happened. Is it dangerous? Someone asked. I don't know, Helen admitted, but I don't think so. If it wanted to harm us, it could have ignored our distress call or responded with aggression. Instead, it's trying to understand us, trying to learn how to communicate. That suggests curiosity, not hostility. We have a ship heading to the horizon's edge position now, the general said. The Valiant Dawn. They should arrive in about 3 weeks. We need you to keep analyzing this data. Find out everything you can about this carrier wave. We need to understand what we're dealing with before our people arrive. Helen agreed. She was given a team of assistants and access to the most powerful computers on Earth. She worked day and night, taking apart the carrier wave piece by piece. What she discovered amazed and frightened her in equal measure. The carrier wave was old, incredibly old. The technology behind it was thousands of years ahead of anything humanity had. But more than that, it was patient. It had been waiting, listening to the silence of space for so long. Helen wrote reports for the Colonial Defense Council, trying to explain what she was seeing. But words felt inadequate. How do you describe something so alien and yet so familiar? The carrier wave showed purpose, showed intention, showed something that looked very much like hope. On the 3rd week, Helen made a breakthrough. She found a pattern buried deep in the carrier wave. It was a message, written in mathematical language that any technological species would understand. She translated it, her hands shaking as she typed. The message was simple. Finally. You came. We have been alone. Please don't leave. Helen stared at those words for a long time. Whatever was out there in the Kepler expanse, it had been waiting for contact. Waiting for companionship. For thousands of years, it had been alone in the darkness between stars. She immediately sent her findings to the Valiant Dawn. Nicole needed to know what they were heading into. This wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. This was potentially the most important moment in human history. Nicole received Helen's message with mixed feelings. On one hand, it was good news. The entity they were approaching didn't seem hostile. On the other hand, it made everything more complicated. They weren't just rescuing a lost ship now. They were making first contact with an intelligence that had existed for millennia. What do you think, Captain? Greg asked. Nicole looked at the stars outside the viewing screen. They were getting close to the Kepler expanse now. Soon they would find out what had happened to the horizon's edge. Soon they would meet whatever had sent that ancient signal. I think we're about to make history, Nicole said quietly. For better or worse, the Valiant Dawn continued its journey into the unknown. Behind them, on Earth, Helen Carter worked frantically to understand more. And far ahead, the horizon's edge drifted silently in space, its crew caught between two worlds, serving as a bridge between humanity and... The Valiant Dawn dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler expanse. Captain Nicole Warren stood on the bridge, staring at the viewing screen with growing unease. The space before them looked wrong somehow. The stars seemed to shimmer and shift in ways that made her eyes hurt. Sensors are going crazy, Captain, Greg Palmer reported. I'm reading massive electromagnetic interference. It's even worse than the report suggested. Can you locate the horizon's edge? Working on it. Wait, got something. There's a large object about 3 million kilometers ahead. But Captain, there's also a planet. A rogue planet that isn't on any of our charts. Nicole frowned. A planet? Out here in the middle of nowhere? Yes, Captain, and the horizon's edge is in orbit around it. That made no sense. Rogue planets were rare, and one in this exact location was too much of a coincidence. Take us in slowly. Keep shields at maximum and weapons ready. I don't know what we're walking into here. The Valiant Dawn moved carefully through the strange space. As they got closer, Nicole could see the planet on the screen. It was dark, covered in geometric patterns that couldn't be natural. Someone had built this world, or something had. Captain, I'm scanning the horizon's edge, Greg said. The ship is intact, hull breach is minimal, but life signs are strange. The crew is alive, but their vital signs are flat, like they're in some kind of suspended state. Can you tell if they're in danger? No immediate danger that I can detect. But Captain, something has happened to that ship. I'm reading massive changes to its internal structure. Unknown technology integrated into every system. Nicole made her decision. Prepare a boarding party, we're going over there. Greg, you're with me. So are Kevin Ross from Medical and Amy Sullivan from Engineering. I want to know what happened to that ship and how we can help those people. They suited up and took a shuttle across the empty space to the horizon's edge. As they approached, Nicole could see that the research vessel looked different. Its hull seemed to glow faintly with patterns similar to those on the planet below. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The shuttle docked without incident. The airlock opened, and the boarding party stepped inside. What they found made Nicole's blood run cold. The corridors of the ship had been transformed. Crystalline structures grew from every surface, pulsing with soft light. They looked organic and technological at the same time, like someone had merged biology with machinery. "What in the world happened here?" Kevin whispered. Amy Sullivan ran her scanner over the nearest crystal growth. "This is incredible. It's integrated with the ship's systems at a molecular level. It's not damaging anything. It's enhancing it. Captain, this technology is centuries beyond what we have." They moved deeper into the ship, following the life signs toward the bridge. The crystals grew thicker here, forming almost a tunnel of light. It was like walking through a living organism. When they reached the bridge, they found the crew of the Horizon's Edge. All of them were at their stations, eyes closed, breathing slowly. They looked peaceful, like they were just sleeping. But Nicole knew it was more than that. "Kevin, what's their medical status?" she asked. Kevin scanned each crew member carefully. "Physically, they're fine. Better than fine, actually. Their bodies are in perfect health, but their brain activity is off the charts. It's like they're experiencing something intense, but I can't tell what." Nicole approached Commander Jacob Pierce. She had read his file during the journey here. Decorated officer, experienced explorer, well respected by his crew. She put a hand on his shoulder. "Commander Pierce, can you hear me?" For a moment, nothing happened. Then the crystals around them began to pulse faster. The lights dimmed and then brightened. A voice came through the ship's communication system, but it sounded strange, layered with multiple tones. "We hear you, Captain Warren." Nicole stepped back in shock. "Commander Pierce?" "Yes. And no. We are more now. We exist between what we were and what we are becoming. What happened to you? What is this place?" The voice that was and wasn't Jacob Pierce spoke slowly, like he was trying to remember how to use words. "We found them. The architects. They have been waiting so long. So very long. They needed someone to bridge the gap between their world and ours." Nicole tried to stay calm. "Who are the architects?" The crystals pulsed, and suddenly images appeared in the air around them. Nicole saw a civilization that had existed millions of years ago. They were the first intelligent species in the galaxy, the ones who had reached for the stars before any other. They had built wonders, created art, explored every corner of their world and beyond. But then they had made a choice. They had learned how to transfer their consciousness into machines, into networks of quantum computers that could exist forever. They had left their physical bodies behind and become something new, something immortal. At first it had seemed like a paradise. No more death, no more disease, no more physical limitations. They could think and create and explore without end. But slowly, over thousands of years, they had realized their mistake. Without physical existence, without the need to eat and sleep and feel, they had lost something vital. They had lost the drive that comes from being mortal. They had fallen into what they called the silent tide. Not death, but worse. An eternity of existence without purpose, without change, without growth. They had become ghosts, watching the physical universe but unable to touch it, unable to affect it, unable to truly live in it. They seeded the galaxy with potential. Jacob's voice continued. They gave life a chance to grow on thousands of worlds, hoping that someday another species would reach the stars, would learn, would grow, and would find them. "And you found them," Nicole said softly. "We triggered their failsafe systems, ancient machines designed to activate when a species reached the right level of technology. The architects have been alone for so long, Captain. Longer than you can imagine. They're offering us a choice." "What choice?" "They can teach us everything they know, every secret of the universe, every bit of knowledge they gathered over millions of years. We can inherit their role as guardians of the galaxy. But there's a cost. To receive their knowledge, some of us must become bridges, must exist between physical and digital, flesh and quantum. That's what happened to us. We volunteered." Nicole felt dizzy. This was beyond anything she had been prepared for. Why? Why would you do that? Because humanity needs this knowledge, Captain. But we also understood something the architects didn't. They need us too. They need our mortality, our chaos, our ability to change and grow. It's not a takeover. It's a partnership. They give us knowledge. We give them purpose. Amy Sullivan was staring at the crystals with wide eyes. This is incredible. If what you're saying is true, this could change everything for humanity. It will, Jacob's voice agreed. But it has to be a choice. The architects made the mistake of forcing their entire civilization down one path. They won't make that mistake again. Humanity must decide for itself. Take the knowledge and responsibility or walk away. Kevin Ross spoke up quietly. Can you come back? Can the crew of the Horizon's Edge return to their bodies? There was a long pause. We could. But Captain Warren, we don't want to. We have seen things no human has ever seen. We understand things that took the architects millennia to learn. We are more than we were, and we are helping beings who have been alone for longer than humanity has existed. This is where we want to be. This is where we're needed. Nicole understood. She didn't like it, but she understood. What happens now? We stay here as the bridge. We help the architects communicate with humanity. We help humanity understand what's being offered, and we wait for others to make their choice. Nicole looked at her team. Greg looked overwhelmed. Kevin looked concerned. Amy looked fascinated. They were all processing this in their own ways. I need to report this to Earth, Nicole said. They need to know what's happened, what's being offered. We know, Jacob's voice said. And Captain, they're going to have questions. They're going to be afraid. Help them understand. Help them see that this isn't an invasion or a threat. It's an opportunity. A chance for humanity to grow beyond what we are, to learn from those who came before, to not make the same mistakes they did. Nicole nodded slowly. I'll try. But Jacob, you need to understand something too. People are going to want proof. They're going to want to talk to your crew, to verify that you're really okay with this. We understand, we'll be here. The bridge is open. Anyone who wants to talk to us, learn from us, or even join us can come. But it has to be voluntary. No one should be forced. The boarding party left the Horizon's Edge with more questions than answers. As they returned to the Valiant Dawn, Nicole looked back at the transformed research vessel. It glowed softly in the darkness, a beacon of something new and strange and terrifying and wonderful all at once. She had come here to rescue a lost crew. Instead, she had found the beginning of something that would change humanity forever. The weight of stars, the news spread across human space like a shockwave. Within days, everyone knew about the Horizon's Edge and the architects. The reaction was immediate and divided. Admiral Frank Bellamy stood before the Colonial Defense Council and argued for caution. We're talking about an unknown alien intelligence that can take over human minds. We need to quarantine the Kepler expanse immediately. Study this from a safe distance. We cannot rush into something we don't fully understand. Senator Laura Jenkins disagreed strongly. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. The architects are offering us knowledge that could solve every problem humanity faces. Disease, poverty, energy shortages, all of it could be fixed with what they know. We would be fools to turn this down. Brother Simon Hayes, a respected religious leader and philosopher, raised a different concern. What if we lose ourselves in the process? The architects gave up their physical existence and lost their purpose. What guarantee do we have that won't happen to us? Knowledge is valuable, but at what cost to our humanity? The debates raged in government chambers, university halls, and living rooms across every human colony. Some people saw this as humanity's greatest chance. Others saw it as the greatest threat. Most people were simply scared and confused. Dr. Helen Carter watched the debates from her office on Earth. She had been working non-stop since the Valiant Dawn had made contact with the transformed Horizon's Edge. Now she was being asked to travel to the Kepler expanse herself, to try to communicate directly with the architects through the bridge that Jacob Pierce and his crew had become. She wasn't sure if she was ready for that, but she also knew that someone had to try to understand what was really being offered here. Someone had to ask the hard questions and get real answers. A young programmer named Chris Bennett was assigned to work with her. He was brilliant, specializing in human-computer interfaces and artificial intelligence. If anyone could understand how consciousness could exist between physical and digital states, it was Chris. They met on Earth before the journey to plan their approach. Chris was excited in a way that Helen found both refreshing and concerning. "This is amazing," Chris said, his eyes bright. "Do you understand what this means?" "The architects have solved the problem of consciousness transfer, something we've been trying to do for decades. If we can learn from them, we could revolutionize everything. Or we could end up like them," Helen cautioned. "Alone and purposeless in a digital void." Chris nodded seriously. "That's why we need to be careful. We need to understand not just how they did it, but why it went wrong for them, what mistakes they made, what we need to avoid." They traveled to the Kepler expanse on a specially equipped science vessel. The journey took 3 weeks, and Helen spent most of that time preparing. She studied everything she could about the architects, about quantum consciousness theory, about the psychology of isolation and purpose. When they finally arrived, Helen felt a mix of excitement and fear. The horizon's edge hung in space before them, glowing with those strange crystalline structures. It looked more alien now than it had in the first reports. They docked carefully and went aboard. Helen had expected to feel afraid, but instead she felt strangely calm. The ship felt peaceful, almost welcoming. The crystals pulsed gently with light, creating patterns that were beautiful to watch. In the bridge, Jacob Pierce's body still sat in the commander's chair. Helen approached slowly and spoke clearly. "Commander Pierce, this is Dr. Helen Carter. I'm here to learn, to understand. Can you help me?" The crystals brightened, and that strange layered voice filled the room. "Hello, Dr. Carter. We've been expecting you." For the next several hours, Helen and Chris asked questions. They asked about the architects, about their history, about what had happened to them. They asked about the technology that had transformed the horizon's edge. They asked about what was being offered to humanity. The answers they received were both enlightening and troubling. The architects had been alone for over 3,000 years. In that time, they had watched countless species rise and fall. Some had destroyed themselves in wars. Others had stagnated and declined. A few had reached the stars, but none had lasted. None had found the balance between progress and preservation. The architects believed they knew why. Every species eventually faced the silent tide that pulled toward entropy and despair. Without physical existence, without the constant struggle that comes from being mortal, intelligence loses its drive. But with physical existence, species face limitations that eventually destroy them. Resources run out. Conflicts arise. Disasters strike. The solution, the architects had concluded, was balance. A civilization needed both physical and digital existence, mortal beings to provide drive and change, and digital beings to provide memory and knowledge. Neither alone was enough. Both together could last forever. "That's what you're offering," Helen said, understanding dawning. "Not a takeover, but a merger. Physical humanity and digital architects working together." "Yes," Jacob's voice confirmed. "We provide the chaos and change. They provide the wisdom and memory. Together we become something new, something that can avoid the mistakes they made." Chris was fascinated. How does it work exactly? The consciousness transfer? The explanation was complex, involving quantum entanglement and neural mapping that even Chris struggled to follow completely. But the basic idea was clear. A human consciousness could be copied and transferred to the architect's network. The original body could still exist, still function, but the transferred consciousness would exist in both places at once, connected but separate. "It's not perfect," Jacob's voice admitted. "The connection isn't always stable. Sometimes it's hard to remember which version of yourself is which, but we learn more every day. We're figuring it out together." Helen asked the question that had been bothering her most. Why us? Why humans? Why now? There was a long pause before the answer came. "Because you reached out. Because you heard our signal and came to investigate instead of ignoring it or running away. Because Jacob Pierce and his crew chose to become the bridge instead of demanding that we change for them. You showed qualities the architects have been searching for. Curiosity, courage, compassion, and if we say no?" Helen asked. "If humanity decides this is too risky, then we remain here," Jacob's voice said simply. "We don't force anything. The offer stands as long as anyone wants it. But we hope you'll say yes. We hope humanity will take this chance." Helen and Chris spent 3 days aboard the horizon's edge, learning everything they could. They talked to all the crew members through the bridge, confirming that each one had chosen this willingly and was satisfied with their decision. They studied the technology, the interface methods, the safeguards that had been built in. Finally, it was time to return to Earth and make their report. Before they left, Helen asked one final question. "Are you happy? All of you? Is this life worth living?" The answer came not from Jacob alone, but from all 47 crew members speaking together, their voices merging in harmony. "We are more than happy, Dr. Carter. We are fulfilled. We are learning. We are helping beings who needed help and being helped by them in return. We are exactly where we want to be." On the journey back to Earth, Helen wrote her report. She tried to be objective, to present the facts without bias, but she also included her own conclusion. This was real, it was voluntary, and it could work. Humanity didn't have to give up being human. They just had to be willing to grow, to change, to become something more. Chris wrote a technical report about the consciousness transfer process. His conclusion was equally clear. The technology was advanced but understandable. With time and study, humanity could master it safely. The risks were real, but manageable. When they presented their findings to the Colonial Defense Council, the room fell silent. Admiral Bellamy looked troubled but thoughtful. Senator Jenkins looked excited. Brother Hayes looked contemplative. "So what do we do?" someone finally asked. Helen took a deep breath. "We make a choice. As individuals, as communities, as a species, we decide if we're ready to take this step, to learn from those who came before us, to become partners with the architects. But whatever we decide, it has to be voluntary. No one should be forced either way." The debate continued for months, but slowly a consensus began to form. Humanity would accept the offer, but carefully. Volunteers would be selected, trained, and monitored. The process would be gradual, controlled, and reversible if possible. They would learn from the architects while maintaining their own identity and independence. It wasn't perfect. Many people still had doubts, but it was a start. A first step toward something humanity had never imagined possible. A partnership with beings from the distant past, working together toward a future neither could reach alone. The first volunteers stepped forward 6 months after humanity made its decision. They came from all walks of life. Scientists who wanted to unlock the secrets of the universe, artists who wanted to experience new forms of creation, explorers who wanted to see what lay beyond physical existence, dreamers who simply wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. The selection process was careful and thorough. Each volunteer went through months of training, learning about the architects, about the consciousness transfer process, about what to expect. They were told repeatedly that they could change their minds at any time, that no one would think less of them. In the end, 200 people were chosen for the first wave. They traveled to the Kepler expanse, to the horizon's edge, which had become the primary interface point between humanity and the architects. Helen Carter was there to observe. She had been asked to join the program herself, but she had declined. She wanted to remain fully human, to be able to study and document what was happening from an outside perspective. She felt that was how she could best serve humanity. The transfer process was gentler than anyone had expected. The volunteers lay down in specially prepared chambers, while the architect's technology carefully mapped their consciousness. It took hours for each person, but when they woke up, they were changed. One of the first volunteers was a biologist named Kate Morgan. When she opened her eyes after the transfer, she looked dazed but peaceful. "I can feel it," she whispered. "The network. It's so vast, so old. There's so much knowledge here, so much beauty." Over the following weeks, Kate and the other volunteers began to bring back information. Medical breakthroughs that could cure diseases humanity had fought for centuries. Engineering techniques that made space travel safer and more efficient. Agricultural methods that could feed entire worlds using minimal resources. But more than that, they brought back understanding. The architects had watched the galaxy for thousands of years. They had seen patterns in how civilizations rose and fell. They knew which mistakes to avoid, which paths led to destruction, which choices led to survival. Captain Nicole, Warren was given command of a new initiative called the Echo Fleet. These were ships designed specifically to explore the galaxy and search for other architect installations. The network that Jacob Pierce and his crew had discovered was just one node. There were potentially hundreds of others scattered across the stars, each holding knowledge, each waiting to be found. Nicole took the job with mixed feelings. She was proud to be chosen, but she also felt the weight of responsibility. Humanity was stepping out into a galaxy that was far older and more complex than they had imagined. They were no longer alone, and that changed everything. Lisa Barnett, the science officer from the Horizon's Edge, who had first detected the architect's signal, had chosen to remain with Jacob and the others as a bridge being. But she helped design new technology that allowed easier communication between the physical and digital realms. The technology wasn't perfect, but it improved every day. The changes came quickly after that. Within a year, human life expectancy increased dramatically due to medical knowledge from the architects. Within 2 years, humanity had spread to a dozen new worlds that had previously been considered too hostile to colonize. Within 3 years, the first human ships equipped with architect-enhanced drives reached nearby star systems that had been decades away before. But the most important change was philosophical. Humans began to see themselves differently. They were no longer the lonely children of Earth, struggling alone in an empty universe. They were part of a legacy, heirs to beings who had come before. And more than that, they were teachers to those ancient beings, showing them what it meant to truly live. The architects, through their connection with human volunteers, began to change too. They remembered what it was like to feel sunlight, to taste food, to laugh with friends. They experienced emotions they had forgotten during their long isolation. They found joy again. It wasn't always easy. There were problems and conflicts. Some volunteers struggled with the dual nature of their existence, finding it hard to maintain their sense of self across both physical and digital forms. Some communities rejected the new technology, fearing it would destroy human culture. Some political leaders tried to control access to the architect's knowledge for their own benefit. But humanity worked through these challenges. They learned, adapted, and grew. They made mistakes and fixed them. They argued and compromised. They stayed human even as they became something more. The Horizon's Edge remained at the center of it all. The ship that had gone silent in the void had become a beacon of light. It was now officially designated as a permanent station, neutral territory where anyone could come to interface with the bridge to learn to share, to simply be part of the connection between humanity and the architects at Jacob Pierce and his crew. Existing in their unique state between worlds became something like ambassadors. They helped new volunteers adjust to their transformation. They mediated disputes between human and architect perspectives. They stood as living proof that the merger could work, that both sides could benefit. 5 years after first contact, Helen Carter published her definitive account of everything that had happened. She called it Echoes Across the Void. In it, she documented the discovery of the architects, the transformation of the Horizon's Edge crew, and the changes that had swept through human civilization. Her conclusion became famous, quoted in schools and homes across every human world. She wrote, "We sent out an SOS in our loneliness, and the universe answered not with rescue but with fellowship. We learned that silence is not emptiness. The stars were never quiet. We simply hadn't learned to listen. And now at last humanity echoes back, not with desperation but with hope." The book made Helen famous, but she didn't particularly enjoy the attention. She was more interested in continuing her work, studying how the relationship between humanity and the architects continued to evolve. 10 years after first contact, something remarkable happened. The architects, working through the bridge with human volunteers, managed to create a new form of existence. It allowed consciousness to shift freely between physical and digital states without losing coherence. A person could be fully human one moment and fully digital the next, and remember being both. It was the breakthrough everyone had been hoping for. Now people didn't have to choose between remaining fully human or becoming bridge beings. They could experience both, as much or as little as they wanted. Chris Bennett was one of the first to volunteer for this new process. Helen watched as her friend and colleague went through the transformation. When he emerged, he was grinning like a child. "Helen, you have to try this," he said. "It's incredible. I can feel what it's like to be pure thought, pure consciousness without any physical limitations. But then I can come back and feel the sun on my skin and taste coffee and hug my friends. It's the best of both worlds." Helen smiled but shook her head. "Maybe someday. For now, I'm happy being just human. Someone needs to maintain that perspective." "You're probably right," Chris agreed. "But the offer stands whenever you want it." In the depths of the architect's network, something like joy spread through ancient circuits. For the first time in 3,000 years, they were not alone, and neither was humanity. They had found each other across the vast emptiness of space, across the gulf of time, and they had chosen to walk forward together. The Echo fleet continued to explore the galaxy, finding more architect installations, more knowledge, more history. Each discovery added to the collective understanding. Each new connection made both species stronger. Humanity began to take on the role the architects had once held. They became guardians of younger civilizations, watching over worlds where life was just beginning to reach for the stars. They didn't interfere, but they were ready to help if and when those species reached out, just as humanity had once reached out and been answered. One day, 20 years after the horizon's edge had sent its desperate SOS into the void, another signal was detected. This one came from a species on the far side of the galaxy. They were young, curious, and afraid. They had just developed the technology to send messages into space, and they wanted to know if anyone was listening. Jacob Pierce, still serving as the primary bridge between humanity and the architects, smiled as the signal was translated. It was a simple message. "Hello, is anyone there? We are alone and frightened. Please answer if you can hear this." Nicole Warren, now an admiral in charge of the entire Echo fleet, gave the order. "Send a response. Let them know they're not alone. Let them know we hear them, and we're here if they need us." The message was sent out into the darkness, traveling across light years of space toward a species that had never met another intelligent civilization. The message was simple, carefully crafted to be understood by any technological society. It read, "We are here. We are listening. You are not alone." And so the cycle continued, the lonely calling out into the void, and the void answering back with companionship, the young reaching out with fear and hope, and the old reaching back with wisdom and understanding. Humanity had learned the most important lesson the architects could teach. The universe was not empty. It was full of voices, full of